Why should or shouldn't DC have statehood rights, and what could be changed with those rights?
Well, there are 700,000 residents in the District of Columbia who pay federal taxes and have no representation in Congress. So that is the chief reason why DC should have statehood. We should have two senators. We should have a voting member of the House of Representatives. We have more residents than several other states who do have two senators in Congress, folks. So yeah, we deserve fair representation like everyone else.
Is there a way that residents can get more involved in the fight for voting representation?
It truly depends on what happens in the other jurisdictions, right? So if I'm encouraging other folks to get involved, while, beyond local elections here in the district, federal elections may not matter as much, but they certainly matter in other places, right? In order for DC to get statehood, you need a trifecta. You need Democrats in the House, you need Democrats in the Senate, and you need the President of the United States to be willing to sign that. Um, and so, to the extent that district residents want to help, um, in those races and swing states and otherwise to ensure that they're the majorities that are there, that's the biggest way that folks can sort of get involved in that fight right now.
What do you think the main argument against DC statehood is? Like, why is it even like that in the first place?
Racism. Like this conversation has come up before, right? And there's always this feeling of like, oh, well, if DC gets statehood, then that's automatically two Democratic senators and another Democratic member that's going to come in. And, you know, I'm sure at the very beginning, when the district was set up as the federal district, there was some true uneasiness around, the home of the federal government, and the White House and the nation's capital, et cetera. Um, Being a state and having that type of political power and the feeling that the jurisdiction needed to remain neutral. But as time went on, it was more clear that no, those fears can be elated, right? In the plans that we have seen around statehood, there's still the ability to have the federal district, the federal enclave, if you will. There are lots of the District of Columbia that has nothing to do with federal government. And those can have the opportunity to have full representation. Now, back when DC was more chocolate city, Republicans just sort of like, we're never doing that. And that had nothing to do with what was happening here, but it had everything to do with their feeling as though that would threaten their power. And you think about it, if the District of Columbia was a state right now and we had elected two Democratic senators, there would not be this split in the Senate that requires the vice president to vote to break so many ties.
That is true. Yeah.
Becoming a state actually will cost the district money in sort of an upfront cost, because one of the things we would have to do is take back our judiciary from the feds. So, building out a judicial system where we are doing prosecutions, where we are housing those who have been convicted and otherwise, because right now those folks are in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And so that's a component that we have not taken over yet. And I feel like if we are truly going to demonstrate ourselves as like being ready for statehood and wanting to pursue this, that's something we definitely have to get control over.
When you think about it like that, it's like much bigger picture of like little steps you have to do, obviously. So I feel like a lot of people don't think about that too. So
Yeah. I don't think that like taking over the judiciary it's not a little thing. It's an expensive thing. If you think about everyone at Superior Court right now is like federal. They are part of DOJ. They are not local. So that's the clerks, that's the prosecutors, that's all the judges, all the folks who work for those judges. And those are U.S. Marshals. That's not our staff. So it's a component that we have to talk about. Also, what do our facilities look like in terms of if you're going to bring everyone back from Federal Bureau of Prisons, where do they go? Who are still serving time? We don't actually have a facility that can accommodate that. So it requires an investment. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying I think everybody just needs to be very clear-eyed about what it will take.
Thank you. That was pretty detailed, informative answer. And so I know you could probably name a lot of different things, but if you could think of like one or a couple of things where lack of voting representation has impacted the daily lives of DC residents, is there something you could like point to and be like, this could be changed if we had the power to vote to change it?
I think the biggest plus of DC having statehood would be that our laws and our budget would not have to go through congressional approval, which is the case now. So right now we're living under certain riders where it says like DC, you can't spend your local dollars um, in certain ways, even though other jurisdictions are able to do so. So we're not able to legalize or regulate the sale of recreational cannabis. But our neighbors in Maryland and Virginia are, and that's because Congress has said we can't spend our local dollars on it. We're not able to spend local dollars to help support people who might be seeking an abortion. But in Maryland and Virginia, they're able to do so. And if we became a state, we wouldn't be able to do that. There's currently an appropriations bill pending in the House of Representatives now that would say DC can't move forward with their needle exchange program, which we already saw data on what happens when we're not able to do needle exchange. And, we're in the middle of an opioid crisis right now. So, like, that's a true public health concern. But, like, we don't actually have a vote or a say in that because, 535 members of Congress who are part time residents in the district get to decide. So those are just like a couple of examples that could like immediately change some things where we're not having to consider these other folks anytime that we want to make a change to our local laws. I mean, even the criminal code review, we did a decade's worth of work to revise our criminal code, which still talks about horses and buggies in the street or that it's illegal to play basketball in the street. And um, lots of work. We passed it, and then Congress and the president overturned it. And so now we're stuck with a criminal code that everybody says is broken, and yet Congress won't let us fix it. Those are just some of the things that, like, if we had statehood, we wouldn't have to deal with that type of nonsense.
That is crazy. Yeah, just not being able to vote, like just decide your own area, things that's happening in your own area, definitely
Yeah.
for
I
sure.
mean, like January 6th was an excellent example. It's sort of the irony of all of this. So,
Yeah,
and to help protect members of Congress take this vote to certify the presidency. And who didn't have a vote? The District of Columbia, even though it was our police forces who were protecting the ability of the democracy to go, like of this democratic act to go forward. How ironic. Like that's some of the stuff that is just like, okay.
how will this upcoming presidential election affect Washingtonians from a legislative standpoint, if at all?
I remind my friends, this has been an interesting couple of weeks since that debate, and I remind them every time I can, especially friends of mine in other jurisdictions, friends of mine who work at the White House, friends of mine in the press, etc., is that if you put any jurisdiction on the board, the District of Columbia has the most to lose by a Trump presidency, the absolute most to lose. We have everything to lose by Democrats losing. Um, and the chief among that is home rule, which Trump has already suggested that DC doesn't need anymore. There's some Republicans in the House of Representatives who would love to see a takeover of the District of Columbia. And given our lack of statehood, it puts a target on our backs to be used as a petri dish
Hmm.
as we have been in the past. And so I understand that everyone, for some folks, this is a game for them, right? The politics of the game, the horse race and all of that. But no, at the end of the day, the District of Columbia has everything to lose by this not going our way. I just want people to remember that. Like there's true lives at stake. And, we saw during Trump's last year with the protests that happened, he is willing to militarize our streets against our own residents, not for security, but for his own personal gain. And that impacts everybody here. Folks losing their jobs for what? Just because they work for a federal agency that he doesn't like. Um, federal jobs, particularly for DC, was the path to the middle class for a lot of Black families here. And they're career civil servants. And, folks should read Project 2025. It's not a game. It's not a game.
It's not at all. Um, well, that's all I have. I feel like you gave, some great informative answers. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Cool. No problem. I look forward to reading what you write.